The ones they called crazy are always the ones holding the script when the show collapses. Look at them, wide-eyed, panicked, pretending it just happened. Pretending they didn't hear you scream from the rooftops while they laughed in your face and called it a conspiracy. Now they choke on the same smoke you warned them about. The house is burning and somehow you're still the villain? No, you were the spark they couldn't control, the truth they couldn't bury. They didn't hate you for lying. They hated you because you refused to. So let's get one thing straight. They were never afraid of you. They were afraid of what you represented. You were proof the mask was slipping, that behind the smiles and the groupthink and the fake peace, something rotten was crawling under the floorboards. You didn't bring the chaos. You just noticed it first. And they can't forgive that. Before we go deeper down this rabbit hole, hit that like button, subscribe, and send this signal out to more of the chosen ones. The system won't spread this truth. We have to do it ourselves. Every tap, every share, every comment tells the machine we're still here, that we're not shutting up, that the era of silence is dead. You knew before they did, way before. Not because you're psychic, not because you're paranoid, but because you were the only one with your eyes open when everyone else was hypnotized by the circus. You weren't watching the clown, you were watching the exits. That's the difference. And here's what they'll never say out loud. It haunts them that you were right. It haunts them that while they mocked, you prepared. While they laughed, you studied. While they slept, you built a fire. So when the cold came, you were ready. And now they shiver in silence, trying to remember what it felt like to feel safe. You were chosen not to fit in, but to fracture the illusion, to be the glitch in their fake perfection, to be the problem in their neat little plan. But even the chosen get tired. Even you started wondering, why me? You thought maybe the silence meant you were off course. Maybe the isolation meant you were wrong. And that's where you almost slipped. Almost. Because the truth is, the universe sharpens its weapons in private. It cuts you cold and deep, not to destroy you, but to turn you into something sharp enough to tear through the lies. You thought you were alone? You were being forged. And now look at them, shocked, scrambling, making up new lies to cover the old ones. But your light doesn't wait for their approval. It doesn't need a crowd. It doesn't blink in the dark. It exposes it. You are the consequence they never prepared for. You are the memory that keeps them awake at night. So stop playing small. Stop dimming your flame because they can't handle the heat. You were chosen to be loud, raw, uncomfortable, to bring the fire they swore would never come. And now, they're in it. This is what happens when the chosen stop apologizing. This is what happens when the quiet ones stop whispering. You are the warning. You are the twist. You are the one they saw coming. Too late. And now the whole damn community's in shock, just like you said they'd be. So, if you've made it this far without flinching, you're not just watching, you're remembering. The chills, that's not fear, that's recognition. Drop the number 77 in the comments if the shock around you feels familiar. Because deep down you always knew this day would come. The unraveling, the exposure, the reckoning. Stay locked in. Truly chosen ones don't scroll past confirmation. They lean in, they devour it. Because every second from here on out is a mirror, and if you're bold enough to face it, you won't walk away the same. Now, let's rip this open, step by step. You ready? Let's begin. Number 1. They called you crazy. Now they're choking on the smoke while you watch the fire you warned them about. They didn't fear your madness. They feared your accuracy. And now that the curtain's fallen, guess who's still standing? Let's not sugarcoat this. They didn't just doubt you, they mocked you, turned your awareness into a punchline, laughed in your face while you stood there, drenched in the blood of truth, screaming, "It's coming!" And what did they do? Laughed harder until it hit them. Now look, those same people are frozen, mouth open, staring at the chaos you predicted like they've just seen a ghost. No, not a ghost, a mirror. You didn't get lucky. This wasn't a hunch. This wasn't some cosmic coincidence. This was ruthless pattern recognition in a world obsessed with pretending the cracks don't exist. While they were too busy licking the boots of the system, you were watching how it limped. While they danced to the noise, you sat in silence and mapped out the fall. They didn't hate you because you were wrong. They hated you because you were early, because you had the guts to say what they only dared to whisper in the dark. You weren't just seeing the signs, you were interpreting them, like a war strategist reading the field before a single shot is fired. And the worst part, you warned them. You gave them the map, the clues, the exit door wide open. But they slammed it shut and laughed behind it. Why? Because they were never looking for truth. They were addicted to comfort. And you were the fire alarm in a party full of sleeping fools. They thought you were unstable? No, you were unstoppable. You've been scolded, sidelined, silenced. You were too intense, too deep, too much. But guess what? Too much is exactly what it takes to survive in a world built on deception. They told you to chill while the ground cracked beneath them. They begged for peace while the storm rolled in. And now they act shocked that they're soaked. But here's what burns them more than the collapse. They know you saw it first. They know you saw the patterns, the setups, the puppet strings behind their idols. You saw the same lie repeated in different costumes. And when you tried to speak, they buried you in mockery. Now they bury their dignity. And you're still here, watching, waiting, glowing in the ruin like a lantern lit from within. Because you weren't broken by their rejection, you were refined by it. And every time you doubted your light, every moment you thought, maybe I'm wrong, the universe just watched in silence, sharpening you. Because the chosen don't get crowds, they get isolation. The chosen don't get comfort, they get clarity. Stop apologizing for being awake in a world of sleepwalkers. You weren't cursed, you were commissioned. Your sight isn't a side effect, it's the main event. You were selected not to please, but to pierce, to rip through illusion like a blade. You didn't get lucky, you got aligned. The universe didn't whisper to just anyone, it chose you. And the second you spoke, the game started glitching. That's why they came for you. Not because you were loud, but because you were right. They were playing with the system, drunk on its rigged rewards, until the system turned to smoke, and you were already holding the extinguisher. They thought they were winning. You knew the game was rigged from the start. That's the difference. That's the threat you posed. So stop flinching when they look at you like you're dangerous. You are. You're the variable that broke their loop. The storm they couldn't prepare for, the glitch in their godless machine. And now that it's all falling apart, don't you dare feel guilty for surviving it. You earned this sight. You suffered for it. And it's time to wield it like the weapon it is. Because you didn't just see the storm coming, you were the storm. And now the community's in shock, but you already saw the ending. Number 2, they mocked you. Now they mimic you. Welcome to the beautiful collapse of their comfort zone. They only call you crazy until their world catches fire. Then suddenly you're a prophet. Funny how that works. Let's paint it plain and brutal. You weren't just ahead of them. You were alone in the storm before they even noticed a breeze. And while they were laughing at the thunder, pretending it was nothing but background noise, you were building the damn ark. You were calculating the fallout, tracking every shift, every fake smile, every nervous twitch when truth came too close to their carefully staged lies. And what did they do? They laughed, not because you were wrong, but because they were terrified you were right. They made you the punchline, the too deep one, the buzzkill, the problem. You'd speak up and the room would shift, not because what you said was wild, but because it cracked their illusion. You'd point out the fault lines, and they'd tell you to stop being dramatic. You saw the rot behind the walls, and they told you, just enjoy the party. The problem wasn't your vision, it was their cowardice. You weren't creating drama, you were breaking the script. And that scared the hell out of them. Because here's the real crime. Not that you saw it, but that you dared to say it. You had the nerve to speak while everyone else was clapping for the circus. You knew the performance was fake, and worse, you said it out loud. That's when the laughter got louder. That's when they tried to bury you in their denial, smother your voice in mockery, wrap their fear in fake concern. You're overthinking. You're too intense. Don't be so negative. But let's talk facts. If you hadn't been mocked, you wouldn't be chosen. Because the chosen aren't validated in real time. They're crucified first. They're dragged through isolation, discredited, shamed, pushed out of the circle, until the exact thing they warned about slaps everyone else in the face. And then, suddenly, your name gets brought up in hushed tones. Wait, didn't they say this would happen? Oh, now they remember. Now the dots they called delusions are becoming headlines. Now the theories they rolled their eyes at are playing out frame by frame, and they're scrambling, trying to catch up to the vision you were punished for having in the first place. They treated your awareness like a disease until they realized it was the antidote. They told you to stay quiet. They told you to chill, but truth doesn't chill, it erupts. And now, here we are. The smoke's thick, the air is tense, and the ones who once dismissed you are now stealing your language, echoing your warnings, pretending they always saw it coming. But we know the truth. They weren't just blind. They chose blindness. Because seeing would mean admitting you were right, and their egos weren't built for that. But you were. You were built in silence, hardened by doubt, refined in solitude. Because the chosen don't get validation. They get visits from the universe, disguised as hardship. Every rejection you faced, it wasn't punishment. It was positioning. You weren't kicked out of the herd, you were pulled ahead of it. To see clearer, to move different, to sense the shift before the earthquake. And it burned. Of course it did. You questioned yourself more times than you'll ever admit. You wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe you were too much. Maybe you should stop watching so closely, stop feeling so deeply. But no matter how hard you tried to numb it, the signals kept coming. The dissonance wouldn't let you sleep. Because the universe wasn't punishing you, it was activating you. This is the raw truth. Being chosen means being misunderstood until the collapse. And when it all starts falling apart, when the lies unravel, when the system glitches, when the truth screams so loud, even the blind feel it, you're not shocked. You're calm, because you knew. You tried to help. You spoke. You were just mocked until proven right. That pain, that exile, that rejection, that was the fire that forged your sight. That was the training ground where the universe sharpened your discernment to the point of discomfort. Because not everyone's built for truth. Not everyone can carry that kind of clarity without breaking. But you didn't break. You burned, quietly, relentlessly, until your fire couldn't be ignored. Now, they wear your warnings like recycled wisdom. Now they talk about energy and vibes and shifts like you didn't live in that awareness while they treated you like a malfunction. They plagiarize your path while pretending they paved it. But deep down, they know who saw it first. And you do too. So don't shrink, don't soften, don't dilute your light because they're finally catching up. You were never meant to follow the herd. You were built to see the wolves before they dressed like shepherds. You were chosen to disrupt, not to decorate their comfort zones. Stop apologizing for being early. That's not a flaw, that's a gift. They hated you because you had the map when they were still pretending there was no road. And now, as they trip over the same truths they used to mock you for, remember this: they needed the world to fall apart to admit you were right. You needed none of that. You already knew, because chosen ones don't need proof. They are the proof. And when the universe aligns, it does not knock politely. It crashes through with force, tearing the veil, snapping the delusion. You weren't being dramatic. You were just in tune with reality, with vibration, with timing. And that scared them more than anything. You didn't bring the storm. You became it. And now they stand in awe of the ruins, whispering your name like a secret. Like maybe, just maybe, they should have listened. But that's the price of being chosen. First, they mock you. Then they fear you. Then, quietly, they follow. And you never needed their permission, just your own fire. And now, look at it burn. Number 3. They laughed until the cracks became craters. That's the cost of seeing clearly in a world addicted to lies. The deeper your clarity, the louder their laughter, because mocking you was easier than facing the collapse they knew was coming. They didn't just laugh at you, they needed to. Every chuckle, every eye roll, every smug comment wasn't about you. It was about them, their discomfort, their fragile egos gasping for air. Under the weight of the truth, you had the nerve to say out loud. You spoke, and it shook their illusions. So they turned you into the problem. Because they couldn't handle the message, they had to break the messenger. You weren't out there waving a flag, begging for a spotlight. You didn't ask to be the one who noticed the fractures no one else wanted to admit were there. You were simply awake. And in a world that runs on illusion, being awake is dangerous. You said, "Something's wrong." They said, "You're crazy." You said, "This doesn't add up." They said, "You're paranoid." But every word you dropped was a mirror, and they hated what they saw in it. Because here's the raw, bitter truth. Clarity is a threat, not just to the system, but to everyone who's built their identity inside that system. You didn't just speak truth, you exposed dependence. They weren't mocking your message, they were protecting their comfort. And your clarity, that was the wrecking ball swinging toward everything they'd built their fake peace on. So they laughed, but not the kind of laughter that comes from humor, the kind that leaks out when fear is cornered, the kind of laugh that shakes too long, too loud, because it's hiding a panic they can't admit. It's easy to joke about a fire when you think you're far enough away from the smoke. But now, the fire's at their door, and suddenly those jokes aren't so funny. They treated you like a threat because you were one, to their denial, to their illusion, to their fragile illusion of control. You weren't chasing clout. You weren't trying to be a hero. You just refused to shut up. You couldn't stomach the silence anymore, so you said it. You spoke it. You dropped the bomb and let it land. And yes, it cost you. It cost you comfort. It cost you company. It cost you belonging in places where truth is a liability. You sat alone. You doubted yourself. You wondered if it was worth it. If seeing this much, feeling this deeply, reading between every line and catching every lie was some kind of curse. But now, look around. The same people who smirked when you spoke are scrambling for answers. They're quoting you without realizing it, echoing warnings they once called delusions. And suddenly, your silence isn't an absence. It's a presence they feel like a shadow on their neck. That's the power of clarity. It waits, it lingers, it echoes when the noise dies down. And still, let's talk about you, the chosen one who almost believed the laughter meant you were wrong. You doubted your vision because it made others uncomfortable. But let me say this, hard and without apology. Discomfort is the price of awareness. You cannot be chosen and coddled. You cannot speak the raw truth and expect applause. You are a sword in a room full of plastic forks. They'll call you dangerous because you cut too deep. You weren't created for comfort, you were built for collision. So the next time the laughter rings out, remember, clowns always laugh when someone points at the smoke. They laugh until the tent burns down. They mock the alarm until the fire eats the walls. And when the screaming starts, that's when your silence becomes the loudest voice in the room. That's when they remember who warned them. You didn't come to be liked. You came to light the match, to speak what they'd rather die pretending not to feel. And yeah, they laughed, but now they flinch when the same phrases you dropped with a calm voice are staring back at them through reality's shattered window. This is what it means to carry truth. It means being mocked until the mirror you hold becomes unavoidable. It means standing in the storm, stripped of approval, wearing nothing but your own conviction. And now it's their turn to feel naked. They laughed because it was easier than listening. They mocked because facing you meant facing everything they buried. They targeted you because you dared to be real in a world that rewards pretending. But guess who's still standing? Guess who's not surprised? You, because you never needed their laughs. You needed the collapse. And now that it's here, they see what you saw. Too late, too loud, too real. And you're still clear. Clearer than ever. Number 4, you let them laugh. Now let them drown in the silence you left behind. The loudest revenge is saying nothing, while reality screams everything you tried to warn them about. You went quiet, but don't mistake that for surrender. That silence, that was strategy. That was precision. That was you stepping back not because you were wrong, but because you were done trying to convince people, determined to stay blind. They laughed loudly, publicly. They mocked your warnings, your tone, your intensity. You became the group's cautionary tale, the dramatic one, the always so serious one. But here's the part they never saw coming. The silence you gave them wasn't defeat. It was a countdown. And now the clock has hit 0. They stopped joking. Have you noticed? No more sarcastic smirks. No more, you think too much. Because now they're living in the very collapse they once turned into a joke. They don't apologize, of course not. Apologies require accountability. What they do instead is shrink. They lower their voices. They avoid eye contact. They sit quietly in the ruins of their own arrogance, pretending they didn't hear you screaming from the rooftop when the first cracks formed. But you remember. You remember every smirk, every dismissive wave, every time they cut you off mid-sentence with a forced laugh. They couldn't see what you saw. No, let's be honest, they refused to. Because seeing what you saw meant facing things they weren't strong enough to confront. And rather than admit their own fear, they turned you into the threat. But you didn't cave. You didn't go quiet because you gave up. You went quiet because you realized the truth doesn't need constant defending. It needs space to land. So you let time carry your message where mouths couldn't. And now, time is screaming it into their bones. You never wanted chaos. You didn't crave disaster. You weren't hoping to be right. What you wanted was clarity, sanity, truth. You wanted someone to see it with you, to say, yes, this doesn't add up. But when no one else did, you chose solitude over safety. You chose to walk alone rather than follow the blind. That's what being chosen costs. It costs company, it costs comfort, but in return, it gives you sight. The kind of sight that rattles people, the kind that exposes more in your silence than their entire vocabulary ever could. And when the storm finally hit, when the illusion finally cracked, they didn't run to save you. They ran to remember what you said. Because now your silence isn't absence, it's a presence that haunts them. It's the echo of everything you refuse to unsee. They walk through the wreckage, and every step sounds like your voice in their head. The things you said months ago, maybe years ago, now play back with surgical clarity. And here's the brutal truth. Silence cuts deeper than screaming ever could. You don't need to say, "I told you so." They hear it every time their fake peace trembles. You don't need revenge. The universe already handled that. Their illusion imploded on schedule, right on cue, and they know. You were never the enemy. You were the warning sign they painted over. Now they stare at you in awkward awe. Some pretend they always agreed. Some fumble for new words that sound a lot like your old ones. Some simply stay quiet, ashamed by the memory of their mockery. But all of them feel it. That shift, that weight, that silence they helped build, now pressing down on them like truth finally getting its revenge. And you're still standing, not bitter, not broken, just clearer, stronger, sharper. You let them ignore you, you let them mock you, and then you let them walk into the storm without you, because they were never following truth, they were following comfort. And comfort doesn't last, but clarity does. It lingers, it radiates, it haunts. You didn't go silent because you were wrong. You went silent because you were done repeating yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That silence was your final gift to them, and it was the loudest thing you ever said. Now look around. The jokes have stopped. The air is different. The ones who rolled their eyes now lower them when you walk in, and you don't need to speak, because your presence is the proof. You weren't after popularity, you were after truth. And now you have it, in every awkward glance, in every swallowed word, in every person who once mocked you and now echoes your thoughts like a script they pretended not to hear the first time. Being laughed at was temporary, but being proven right, that's eternal. And you didn't even have to raise your voice. Number 5. You didn't need evidence, you felt the rot in the room before it spoke. Energy tells the truth that words choke on, and while they were busy talking, you were listening to the silence between their smiles. They all thought the fall came suddenly, like chaos just happened overnight, like collapse is ever random. But you knew better. You felt it, long before anything snapped. Before any scandals, before any cracks showed on the surface. You felt the energy turn. The air in the room shifted. The warmth drained. The buzz got cold. You felt the lights go dim even when the switch was still flipped on. They told you not to overthink it. But you weren't thinking. You were reading. Energy, vibe, atmosphere, the kind of signals that never lie, even when every mouth in the room does. It wasn't one big moment. It was the slow, creeping rot beneath all the polished performances. The laughter sounded scripted. The compliments landed heavy. The eye contact was off by just a second too long. You knew it before the fall. Not because anyone warned you, but because the truth doesn't need a megaphone to scream. It radiates, it pulses, it gets under your skin and won't let go. And you were built to feel it. The praise that once uplifted started to feel transactional. The smiles that used to comfort now looked like masks being held a little too tightly. The energy in the room wasn't electric, it was stale. Something was dying, and no one had the guts to call it out. They all kept dancing like the song wasn't skipping. But you heard every glitch. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you chosen. Because the chosen don't wait for announcements. They move with the unseen. You don't need proof to believe what your soul already confirmed. While they were hypnotized by charisma and noise, you were feeling the vibrations shift. Vibrations don't lie. You knew the engine was dying even while they revved it harder, and every time you tried to say it, they brushed it off like static. You're overreacting. It's all in your head. But what they didn't know is you'd already grieved it. You'd already mourned the fall before it happened. That's why when it finally did, you didn't flinch. You were calm in the chaos, because the collapse didn't surprise you. It confirmed you. They thought you were cold, distant, disconnected, but you weren't disconnected. You were done. Done pretending not to feel what was screaming in the energy around you. Done faking it for people addicted to illusion. You weren't negative. You were just unwilling to lie to yourself. And that makes people nervous, because most of them would rather drown in denial than sit in truth. But not you. You were never afraid of the shift. You are the shift. You walk into a room and feel the walls tighten. Not because of what you say, but because of what you sense. You see the discomfort they're hiding behind status. You feel the betrayal wrapped in fake loyalty. You can read the whole play before anyone even steps on stage. And that terrifies people, because when energy shifts, you move. You don't need approval. You don't need an announcement. You know what they're not saying, and that's what gives you power. The power of silence. The power of presence, the power of a gaze that cuts through the noise like a blade. You knew the fall was coming, not because you saw it, but because you felt it. And when it came, you didn't get loud. You didn't shout, "I told you so." You just stood still while everyone else scattered. You watched them panic in real time, and inside, all you felt was peace. Because your soul had already made peace with it long before the world caught up. This is what it means to be chosen. It's not about always knowing what will happen. It's about knowing when something's off, even when everyone else is calling it perfect. You can't fake alignment. You can't perform frequency. Energy never lies. And you've been speaking that language in a world that only listens to volume. So they called you distant, cynical, cold. But now they're the ones going numb. Now they feel the hollowness. Now they're waking up in the silence you already moved through. And what they once called paranoia, they now call gut instinct. What they once dismissed, they now depend on. But you're already gone. Because when energy shifts, the chosen don't stay. They exit quietly. They let the collapse happen without fanfare, because when the vibe rots, you don't argue with it. You evacuate. You don't chase explanations. You move like the storm is already here, and that's why you're still intact while they scramble for shelter. You didn't flinch, because the collapse wasn't your punishment. It was your confirmation. You were never too sensitive. You were always just ahead. And now, the same silence they feared is the silence they sit in. And you've already moved on to higher ground. Because the energy warned you, and you listened. Number 6. They called it loyalty. You watched it morph into manipulation in real time. It was never loyalty, it was proximity to power, and the second the power shifted, so did their so-called devotion. Let's rip the mask off this one. What you witnessed wasn't loyalty, it was leverage dressed in loyalty's skin. It was strategy, politics, survival tactics disguised as solidarity, and you saw it, long before anyone else dared admit it. While they sang songs about trust and family, you saw the quiet transactions happening behind the curtain. You saw how loyalty wasn't earned, it was rented, and everyone had a price. It started small, a skipped thank you, a favor unreturned, a subtle shift in tone when the room changed. You noticed the difference between who they were with you in private and who they pretended to be when someone with status walked in. You noticed the way brotherhood dissolved the second opportunity knocked elsewhere. You watched them swear allegiance to one vision, then sell it to the highest bidder without blinking. And if you said anything, you were bitter, jealous, paranoid. Funny how truth always sounds like madness until it starts costing people their masks. They didn't evolve, they exposed themselves, because when the tide turned, so did they. Not out of growth, not because they had a revelation, but because the old ship wasn't profitable anymore. So they jumped, smiling, waving, calling it reinvention. But you knew better. It was betrayal, but made to look like business. That's what disgusted you. Not just the disloyalty, but the performance. The fake loyalty, the rehearsed empathy, the way they clung to the mission when it was profitable, then rebranded it as the past, the moment it threatened their image. They didn't change, they revealed. And you said nothing, not because you didn't care, not because you didn't see it, but because you knew time would do the exposing better than you ever could. You chose silence, not out of fear, but out of strategy. You didn't want to throw rocks. You wanted the mountain to collapse on its own. And it did. You watched them move like snakes in suits, saw them flatter the power holders while pretending to still be part of the people. You watched them walk past the same ones they used to call family, now too busy shaking hands with their new benefactors, and every time they smiled in your face, your gut twisted, not in pain, but in confirmation. This is what loyalty looks like when it's based on conditions, temporary, hollow, and self-serving. They weren't loyal to people, they were loyal to benefits, and the second those benefits dried up, so did their so-called brotherhood. They ghosted, rebranded, distanced themselves like you were the liability. They pivoted with smooth PR statements and fake grace, all while hoping no one remembered what they used to stand for. But you remembered. You remember everything. Because that's the curse and the gift of being chosen. You don't just see what's happening, you see why it's happening. You see the motives behind the moves, the whisper behind the speech, the greed behind the smile. You saw the loyalty wasn't about belief, it was about access. You saw the truth, and the truth was ugly. They didn't stand by you because they believed in you. They stood by you because at the time, standing next to you made them look better. You gave them credibility, and the second that cost more than it paid, they left. Quietly, politely, like cowards dressed in professionalism. And yet they'll pretend they evolved. That's their favorite lie. Growth. New chapters. But real growth is rooted in principle, not preference. And you saw the difference. You felt it. You knew they weren't shifting because of truth. They were shifting because it was safer to do so. And when safety is your compass, loyalty dies in the fog. But let them have their theater. You stayed silent, not because you were okay with the betrayal, but because you trusted time to show them exactly who they are. And now, that silence echoes louder than anything you could have shouted, because the same people they ran to, they're starting to see through them too. The patterns are catching up, the smiles are cracking, the rehearsed lines are starting to stutter. Time always reveals what ego tries to hide. You didn't lose them, they lost you. Because when you're loyal to truth, you can't fake allegiance. And when the room starts spinning, the ones with real conviction stand still. They don't pivot, they don't perform, they don't bail. So don't flinch, don't wish them well if it's not honest. Don't smile for closure that never came. Just keep walking, keep building, keep trusting what you saw, because what you saw was real. They called you paranoid, now they call you correct. That's not bitterness, that's clarity. And loyalty? Loyalty's not about who stands next to you when the lights are on. It's about who stays when the room goes cold. Number 7. You didn't leave the community. You outgrew the costume party they mistook for purpose. They weren't building unity, they were building an audience. And the second you stopped clapping, you became the threat. Let's strip this down to bone and marrow. What they called a community was a masquerade. What they praised as unity was a performance. You didn't abandon the tribe. You recognized the script. You sat in the front row long enough to memorize the lines, watch the cues, spot the forced smiles and the well-timed applause. And then you stood up and walked out, because pretending was costing you your soul. They say you changed. You didn't. You just stopped lying to yourself. You stopped calling shallow support loyalty. You stopped mistaking hollow collaboration for connection. You stopped clapping for people who only reached out when the cameras were on. What they called love was leverage. What they called community was commerce. Everything felt like an ad campaign, clean, polished, and completely empty. You saw it. The glitter wasn't gold, it was camouflage. The tribe wasn't a family, it was a fan base. The vibe wasn't unity, it was audition energy. People didn't show up for each other, they showed up for optics. Every word said into a mic was rehearsed in front of a mirror. Every smile came with a calculation, and still you stayed silent. For a while, you kept giving them the benefit of the doubt, hoping someone else would say what you felt, hoping maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. But with every "let's collab," every staged support post, every moment of fake alignment, it became clearer. This wasn't real. It was production. And the worst part? They wanted you to play along, to stay in line, to keep dancing in sync, even though your rhythm died a long time ago. But you couldn't, not because you wanted to rebel, but because your soul was suffocating. Truth doesn't dance on cue. It doesn't smile when it doesn't mean it. It doesn't sit at the table when the food is poisoned with ego. So you stood up. You stopped responding to the check-in messages that were just dressed-up status updates. You stopped reposting fake support from people who wouldn't answer your call if there was no audience to witness it. You started sitting in rooms that didn't require performance, and that made you dangerous. Because you weren't just breaking the illusion, you were proof it wasn't needed, and that shattered them. You want to know why they got quiet when you left? Why the energy shifted? Because you were the mirror, and once the mirror walks away, they can't pretend to look good anymore. You were the soul in the show, the one who actually meant what you said, the one who stayed long after the clout disappeared. And when you left, the whole thing started to feel plastic, because it was. They didn't build something real. They built a stage and then mistook the spotlight for love. But you knew better. You didn't leave because you hated them. You left because you loved truth more. You chose authenticity over applause. You chose silence over being part of a noise machine. You chose stillness over staged unity. And now they call you bitter, confused, distant. But what you really are is clear. Clear enough to see the difference between unity and uniformity, between real connection and curated proximity. You didn't change, you just stopped shrinking to fit in. You realized you were never part of a tribe. You were part of a production, and once the curtain dropped, the love disappeared. But real ones don't vanish when the show ends. Real ones are there in the dark, in the backstage silence, in the moments that never get posted. And they weren't. So stop mourning the loss. Stop questioning your clarity. You didn't lose a family. You left a fantasy. You outgrew the illusion. And they'll call you everything but right, because that truth tastes like betrayal to people who never showed up without a camera. You're not lost. You're free. Free from the choreography. Free from the forced laughter. Free from the echo chamber where people nod even when their spirit screams no. They'll keep dancing, but you walk alone, in truth, in silence, in power. And that's the real community. It's not built on noise, it's built on alignment. And you were never meant to be part of their performance. You were meant to expose it. And you did. Number 8, you grew without their permission, and that's why they call it betrayal. They didn't love you, they loved your silence. And the second you outgrew your cage, they called it attitude. Let's make something brutally clear. You didn't change to spite them. You evolved because staying the same was killing you. But they won't tell it like that. They'll spin the story. They'll rewrite the script. They'll say you flipped, you switched up, you think you're better now. Because if they admitted the truth, that you simply outgrew the mold they stuffed you into, they'd have to face their own stagnation. And they can't do that. So you become the villain. They had a version of you that worked for their comfort, a watered-down you, a convenient you, the agreeable one, the predictable one, the smaller one. You fit their expectations like a prop fits a set. You were safe, soft, and silent enough to not rattle the fragile world they'd built. As long as you kept playing your part, everything was fine. But you started thinking for yourself, speaking for yourself, moving for yourself, and suddenly you became too much. Not because you were reckless, not because you turned toxic, but because you stopped shrinking to fit their narrative. You stopped playing by rules that only benefited them. You stopped apologizing for being real. And to people who only ever liked the version of you they could control, authenticity feels like betrayal. Your growth exposed their comfort. Your self-respect made their manipulation harder. You weren't difficult, you just stopped being digestible. So they left, or they changed, or they turned cold. The hugs got tighter, but the eyes colder. The conversations became shorter, the support got quieter, and they'll swear it's nothing personal, just busy, just different paths, just life. But we both know the truth. They didn't leave because you became worse. They backed off because they couldn't manage the new you, because the real you wasn't as easy to control. The real you had boundaries, standards, a voice that no longer trembled, and that voice made them nervous. So they distanced themselves, not because you're in the wrong, but because you're no longer easy to keep small. That's the cost of evolution in a world obsessed with comfort. The minute you step out of the old shell, people start throwing labels to force you back in. You're different now. You've changed. You're hard to talk to. Damn right you've changed. You're not a mirror for their denial anymore. You're not the quiet seat filler in their drama. You're not the background character in their fake self-love campaign. You are your own damn story now, and that terrifies them. They never loved you. They loved who you were when you were still cutting yourself into pieces to keep the peace. They loved the performance, the compliance, the easy-to-handle version. But the moment your soul stopped bending for applause, you became too intense. Let them call it whatever they want. Call it rebellion, call it ego, call it disloyalty. You know what it really is? Freedom. Evolution isn't loud. It doesn't need to kick doors down. It's subtle, internal, surgical, but it shakes the foundation of any relationship built on imbalance. Because the second you step into your fullness, everyone who benefited from your smallness has to either grow up or walk out. And most of them walk. Let them. You weren't made to fit into spaces that punish your growth. You weren't born to be easy to digest. You're not a side dish on someone else's plate. You're the main course, the whole damn table. And if that threatens people, good. It should. Growth should threaten comfort. Truth should rattle performance. So don't edit yourself for their peace. Don't shrink to be palatable. You didn't survive everything you've been through just to become manageable. You're not rebellious. You're reborn. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. It demands space. So make it. Even if that means walking alone. Because walking in your truth, unfiltered, unedited, unapologetically whole, is worth more than all the fake loyalty you had to beg for when you were broken. You didn't change for them, you changed for you, and they'll never forgive that. But you'll never regret it. And now, as the smoke clears and the masks lay shattered, one truth remains. You were never wrong for seeing what others refused to face. You were simply ahead. This wasn't rebellion. This was revelation. And the world is finally catching up to the warnings you carried alone. If this message hit something deep, like and subscribe to keep this energy alive. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you're done shrinking, done pretending, done playing small. Share this with another chosen one who's been doubting their clarity. The storm didn't break you. It revealed who you've always been.